Hello and welcome to the TF1 show. I would like to begin today's episode with an apology for the slight delay in releasing this episode. I can now finally say that I know what emotions Claire Williams must have experienced when she couldn't deliver the 2019 Williams on time, and let me tell you, the feeling of self-loathing is absolutely crippling. But what I can promise you is that unlike Williams last year, I'm on the road to recovery with today's episode where we will be discussing all of the drama around the Ferrari 2019 engine. Now, if you haven't been following the news over the last 2 weeks, I guess not everybody is a sort of sad, pointless Formula One fanatic like myself. Not that any Formula One fanatics are pointless, of course. You're all very pointful, as am I guess. But anyways, I digress as per usual. What I would like to talk about first is I just want to create a bit of context around what is basically the purpose of this episode. Now, you'll remember throughout, especially the second half of last year, there were lots of questions around the Ferrari power unit and just rumors that Ferrari might not be completely above board when it came to their engine and the amount of power that it produced, especially during qualifying sessions. I guess we saw the most pronounced impact of this during the Spa qualifying session, the Monza qualifying session, and the Ferrari had incredible speed on the straights, most particularly during qualifying, which obviously raised a lot of red flags amongst their rival teams. Not completely unjustified, I think. I think even myself, I was a bit skeptical when they made such a big jump in power, compared to 2018, where they still had a good engine, but it was a lot more comparable to the other engines around the grid. However, last year they seem to have made this massive step. Now, for an engine formula as mature as the current turbo hybrid engines that we have at the moment, it's highly unlikely for a big step like that to occur, like we saw last year. So I think it's natural for rival teams to have been slightly suspicious, or at least to have asked the question from the FIA around, are they comfortable with Ferrari's engine performance, and are they actually monitoring to make sure that this engine is within the parameters that's set out in the rules. Now, as a consequence to this, the FIA issued all sorts of technical directives to try and potentially close any grey areas or loopholes that Ferrari could have been exploiting. One of them being that no team is allowed to manipulate the fuel flow meter that the FIA has installed to measure the actual rate of fuel flow, I guess, through the engine, which would obviously, if manipulated, would mean that more fuel is essentially pumped through the engine at any point in time, which means more power. Another technical directive that they issued was one around not burning any sort of other liquids from something like the intercooler, that they can't burn oil from the intercooler in a controlled manner. That would also be deemed illegal. So this is sort of a way for the other teams to try and snuff out what Ferrari could have potentially been doing, and then check every time after the FIA released a technical directive like this. The teams would go and try and see if they can spot any sorts of difference in the actual Ferrari engine performance. Ferrari obviously was very, very staunch in their defense of their engine, saying that the main reason for the difference in speed on the straights was mainly due to the fact that they had a less draggy car compared to the Red Bull and the Mercedes specifically. Now, at the end of last year, the FIA decided to finally put all of these speculation and all of these questions from the other teams to bed, and they ordered Ferrari to provide them with a version of their engine in order for the FIA's team of technical engine boffins to go and perform all of their wizardry and trickery and to try and understand if they can detect anything untoward in the Ferrari engine. Now let's skip to today, where we are about a week away from the first Grand Prix of the 2020 season. And let me tell you, dear friends, much has happened since we last spoke at just after the last day of testing, where I issued or where released my episode on the second week of testing and my thoughts on that. And if you remember, and if you listen to last week's episode, I did mention right at the end that Ferrari, apologies, that the FIA released a short statement 15 minutes before testing finished, where they essentially said that between the FIA and Ferrari, they reached an internal settlement that will not be disclosed, and that Ferrari is going to basically assist them with improving the policing of the Formula One engines, and also in funding some research into sustainable fuels. Now, this obviously did not go down well with any of their rival teams, because this is probably just a massive anticlimax to all of this build up over the past couple of months. And the press release didn't really provide any conclusive answers as to whether Ferrari actually did anything illegal or not. So a couple of days later, the non-Ferrari teams presented a united front as they all released identical statements from their team email accounts that basically read that the teams not using Ferrari engines, are highly disappointed in the press release released by the FIA, and that they demand transparency and clarity around this matter, and actually even threatened the FIA with potential legal action if they don't properly clarify their position and to provide more detailed results on the investigation that they performed. Now, this obviously is quite a historic. Apologies for any background noise. There's quite a loud gate close to where I'm recording my podcast. So people are entering and exiting quite furiously at the moment. Hopefully it's not too distracting. In any case, I continue. What I was saying is that, an event like it was 7 teams basically, agreeing on something which already is in Formula One almost impossible, but they united their stances and decided that they will rise up against the alleged tyranny of the FIA and the blatant favoritism shown to Ferrari, as was always rumored in the past, in the years of Michael Schumacher, where, people kept saying that the FIA is actually short for Ferrari International Assistance and, all of that nonsense. In any case, what I found interesting is that firstly, well, actually it's not interesting, it's not even surprising that the rival teams came out and said that they do not agree with what's basically been decided, and that the FIA has a responsibility to the sport to be transparent and to do the right thing, which I fully agree with actually. Don't really know what the FIA thought they were going to achieve by releasing that little statement just before the end of testing, whether they thought they were going to fool anyone with the timing of that statement, and whether, they were secretly hoping the teams would somehow miss that announcement or ignore that announcement. I don't really get it. I don't believe that the boffins at the FIA are that stupid that they would have thought that would have worked. So obviously they decided, maybe they want to minimize the potential fallout. Maybe they didn't want the press to get into, to stick their teeth into that story during testing, while testing was going on. Or they actually expected the teams to react like this and are actually using, the rival teams to maybe create a bit of a bigger discussion around the potential legality of the Ferrari engine. Who knows what they were thinking, but I think definitely all of us can agree that they weren't, that statement wasn't going to end there. And it turned out it didn't, because then the teams came out and was quite vocal in their actual attack on the FIA and on Ferrari, and demanded more answers and more information. The FIA then came back, surprise, surprise, with another statement where they, in short, and obviously all of these statements are on the internet for you to go and read them properly. I'm not going to read them out to you now. It's all just plastered with legal jargon and, all of that nonsense. So I'm going to spare the trouble and just give you a short summary of basically what the FIA said. They came back and said, well, reaching a private settlement is well within their own legal framework. They basically have their own code of conduct where they say that the FIA in certain circumstances can come to a private settlement with another team, and to then consider the case closed and to not, make a mountain out of a molehill as such. And that they are always obviously on the forefront of protecting the integrity of the sport, and have decided that this course of action is going to be the best for all the stakeholders involved. But the most interesting thing that came out of that whole statement was the fact that the FIA did admit that they were not entirely happy with the Ferrari engine, and that Ferrari obviously was very much in opposition of that conclusion, and that they were serious about the fact that their engine was completely illegal, and that they operated the engine within the parameters of the rules. Now, the FIA decided to go and chase this potential private settlement because, according to them, they thought that it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to be able to prove that Ferrari actually operated this engine illegally, and that it's going to take undue cost and undue money for them to go and try and prove this, with the strong possibility that, even after going through all of this expense and all of this time and effort, that they still won't be able to reach a proper conclusion. Now, this is all good and fair, I guess. Immediately raises the question, what was Ferrari doing? What did the FIA find in that engine that sort of gave them the impression that something about the Ferrari engine wasn't very much within the rules? Was it potentially a grey area in the regulations that the FIA didn't pick up initially that Ferrari exploited? Was it a matter of Ferrari doing something completely outright illegal, but that it was just, difficult for the FIA to actually prove, even though they had their strong suspicions? Just, big questions, I think, were raised when the FIA released that statement. I think, firstly, will definitely not be the last we hear of this. I think the teams are going to definitely raise a big alarm on that statement. They're going to make a big noise. Don't know what the next step is going to be. Is there going to be another joint statement? Somehow I doubt it, because I think coordinating, amongst 7 Formula One teams, and 7 Formula One teams as PR teams, to land on the exact wording on a 3-sentence statement is probably going to take days, if not weeks. So it's going to be interesting to see if the teams are going to keep presenting a united front, or whether some of the bigger teams like Mercedes and Red Bull are going to go, solo and try and take this fight to the FIA and the Ferrari, because obviously there are massive potential ramifications if it does turn out that Ferrari did something a bit shady. The most, I guess, pronounced being just the prize money implications. If they did do something illegal last year, Red Bull would feel that they are the rightful second place winners, and Ferrari should be disqualified from their championship position, which obviously has prize money implications. And then the same goes for, the midfield teams, that would obviously also move up a couple of positions, given that Haas and Alfa Romeo also use Ferrari engines. So I think the teams are going to try and milk this as much as possible, the rival teams now. And so it's going to be interesting to see if the teams can actually try and figure out what it was that the FIA picked up in the Ferrari engine. Now, the second question that this raises to me is, what worries me is that the FIA thinks there's something wrong but can't prove it. Because that then means, or I'm just trying to sort of fathom the implications of knowing that something is wrong, but because you're not able to prove it, is it due to the complexity of the engine or due to the fact that the engine was sort of investigated post the actual use in the race? I'm just sort of trying to fathom how the FIA can't prove whether the engine is illegal or not. Because obviously, and I'm not a mechanical or a systems engineer, but in my head, if they can see something's wrong in the engine, something's wrong in the engine. So I wonder whether it was something like in a data trace or in some dyno trace that they ran, that they picked up some irregularity. But the worry to me here is if the FIA, i.e. the governing body of Formula One, can't enforce its rules conclusively and actually hand out punishment as it should if these rules are breached, what is preventing other teams from taking chances and basically baking in advantages into their technology? And as long as they can mask it well enough in order to make it impossible for the FIA to prove that they have been using this, given the complexity of the current technology in use, that's not, outside of the realm of possibility. How can we protect the integrity of Formula One? How can we ensure that teams stay within the rules if the governing body can't properly and adequately police these incredibly complicated engines? So I think if I were the rival teams, that's going to be the avenue of interrogation that I'd follow is just, to try and understand from the FIA, what about this Ferrari engine was so, unprovable? What about the suspicion that they had made it so impossible to prove, that Ferrari was doing something illegal? And if I were a rival team, I think that would be my first question, because again, if I know that opportunity exists as a massively competitive team, I'm probably going to take advantage of that if the FIA can't actually police these things. So, slightly worried about the implications of all of that. And I guess also in my ignorance or stupidity or whatever you can call it, I don't understand how the FIA can't prove that the Ferrari team was doing something wrong. Now, my last thought on this is, if it does turn out that there was some irregular things going on, it's going to make me sad, and it's going to make me slightly angry as well at the Ferrari team, because, Ferrari is, at the end of the day, the biggest team in Formula One in terms of brand, in terms of what it means to so many people watching throughout the world. And for them to resort to potential irregularities and to lie about it like this for months upon months upon months, I just feel that that's not really upholding the responsibility that they have towards the sport of Formula One. Because as much as people say that, Formula One would be nothing without Ferrari, Ferrari would also be nothing without Formula One. Ferrari's entire brand, the myth of Ferrari was built on the fact that they were, the creators of the Formula One car. They were there from the beginning. They were the team to beat at the beginning. So I just feel that, when you are a team like Ferrari, sometimes taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture is sometimes also necessary. And with most sort of, let's say exploitation of grey areas in Formula One, it all comes out at the end. It might not come out at the beginning. It might not come out during the season. But at the end of the day, all of these little things come out into the open. Think back to, Spygate in 2007 between McLaren and Ferrari, the massively controversial Crashgate in 2008 with Renault and Nelson Piquet Jr. That only came to light more than a year after it actually happened. So I just think if you're Ferrari, I really do hope that actually, what they did was exploit a grey area and that they didn't do something outright illegal. Because if they did, I'm just going to be very sad for, what that could potentially mean about Formula One, and the fact that it, such an established brand in the sport, does resort to things like that, despite them having the biggest budget, despite them having the most amount of prize money every year, that they actually can't win above board. So I'm going to keep hoping that all of this actually turns out to be a bit of a storm in a teacup, and that Ferrari did come up with an ingenious solution in their engine that resulted in them, winning a couple of races last year. Even though they didn't win the championship, watching a competitive Ferrari against Mercedes, against Red Bull, is what we all want to see in Formula One. So I really do hope we can continue to see that. Now, what do you guys think? Was Ferrari doing something shady in the background? What do you think should the potential consequences be if they are shown to be guilty? Should we all just leave sleeping, prancing horses lie and move on with life? Please share your thoughts with me. You can do it on Twitter, on Instagram, in the comment section of this podcast. Happy to have a conversation as always and hear what you guys think. Now, before I finish today's episode, I just wanted to give you a quick reminder to join the official TF1 Fantasy League. Now, I'm excited to see everyone that's already joined, and I strongly encourage all of you listening to join in on the fun and compete against myself and all of the other TF1 show listeners. Now, they're obviously of only the most pure blood of F1 podcast listeners, so it'll be great if you guys can join the league. You can go and check out the description of this episode for the code you need to join. You can just sign up on the F1 Fantasy site, through the F1 website to create your teams, and then after that you can just click to add a code to join the TF1 League. Right, I think it's time for me to sign off for the week. I posted on Twitter recently that I can't wait for the F1 season to get cracking, and I invite all of you to watch the Australian Grand Prix on Sunday. With all of the chaos going on in the world due to the coronavirus, we need to appreciate every single bit of enjoyment we can get in Formula One. So I'll speak to you all next week. Bye.